My name is Mgbafo, and I was born on a rainy morning in the small but busy town of Obinagu. My mother used to say that the rain that morning was a blessing, that it washed away all her pain and gave her peace. I never saw her happier than when she told me that story. She would smile, touch my cheek, and say, "You brought me light, my daughter." When I was little, my world was soft and warm. My father was a teacher, tall, gentle, and full of stories. Every evening he came home smelling of chalk and rain. He always carried something small for me, ground nuts, sweets, sometimes just a smile that made me feel like the richest girl in the world. My mother sold fruits by the roadside, near the big junction where buses and okadas rushed past all day. Her stall was full of colors: oranges, mangoes, bananas, and pawpaw. When she laughed, her voice was like music. Our house was small but full of peace. There were 3 rooms and a small kitchen behind. At night, we would sit outside under the stars while my father told stories of old kings, of the tortoise, and of brave women who faced storms and never gave up. I believed life would always stay that way, full of light, full of laughter, full of love. But life, I later learned, is like water. It flows wherever it wants. It does not ask you before changing direction. I was 8 when the first storm came. My father fell sick one Sunday morning. He was supposed to go to church, but he could not get up. His hands trembled, his eyes looked lost. Mama thought it was just malaria, but it was not. The sickness stayed. We took him to the hospital. The doctors used big words that made Mama cry. They said he needed more tests, more medicine, more money. At first, we sold our small radio, then Mama sold her gold earrings. When that was not enough, she borrowed money from her friends at the market. For months, we lived in fear. Every day, I watched Papa's body shrink. He stopped smiling, stopped telling stories. Sometimes he held my hand and said, "Be strong for your mother." I didn't understand what he meant then. The day he died, the sun refused to shine. It was as if the sky knew something terrible had happened. Mama screamed and fell to the ground. I stood beside her, frozen, unable to cry. I didn't believe he was gone. I waited for him to wake up, to say, "Mgbafo, stop crying." But he never did. After the burial, people came for some days and then stopped. The food stopped coming too. The market women who used to call Mama sister started avoiding her. She began to go to the market earlier and returned later, her feet swollen, her eyes tired. Sometimes she sold nothing. Sometimes she didn't eat so I could have something. One evening, as we sat on the floor eating boiled yam, Mama looked at me and said, "My daughter, you must never let poverty make you lose your kindness. Always remember that your heart is stronger than your body." I nodded. I didn't know that those would be some of her last words to me. Months later, she started coughing. It was small at first, then it became worse. I would hear her coughing at night until her whole body shook. She tried to hide it from me, but I knew. I begged her to go to the hospital. She said she would after she sold enough fruits, but she never sold enough. One day I came home from school and found her lying on the floor, her fruits scattered. I ran to her, screaming. Our neighbor helped carry her to the hospital. They said it was her lungs, that she needed injections and rest. I sat beside her hospital bed every day, holding her hand, praying that she would get better. But Mama was tired. One morning, she woke up and smiled weakly. She said, "Mgbafo, promise me one thing. Promise me you won't give up no matter what happens." I held her hand and said, "I promise." That evening she slept and never woke up. I was 10 years old when I became an orphan. That night, as they covered her body with a white cloth, I felt my heart break. It didn't shatter loudly, it just cracked silently like clay drying under the sun. That was the first time I felt the weight of loneliness. A weight so heavy it almost took my breath away. After Mama's burial, our relatives gathered to decide what to do with me. Some said they were too busy. Some said they had no space. Finally, my mother's elder sister, Auntie Rose, agreed to take me in. Everyone praised her for her kindness, but I saw the coldness in her eyes. Auntie Rose lived in the same town, in a bigger house with a small shop in front where she sold clothes. When I arrived, she looked at me from head to toe and said, "You are not coming here to eat free food." "You will work?" I nodded. I had no other place to go. From that day, my childhood ended. Every morning, I woke before dawn to sweep the compound, wash plates, fetch water, and open the shop. Auntie Rose had 2 children, both younger than me. They went to school every morning in clean uniforms. I stayed home to work. When I asked if I could also go to school, she said, "Who will pay your fees? You think life is easy?" So I stopped asking. I watched other children with books and bags, their laughter filling the air as they walked past our gate. Sometimes I closed my eyes and imagined I was one of them. Auntie's house was full of rules. I was not allowed to sit when she was working. I was not allowed to eat until her children had finished. If anything went wrong, I was the one she blamed. Some nights, when I lay on the mat in the corridor, I cried quietly. But even in those moments, I remembered Mama's words, "Don't give up." Years passed like that. I learned to hide my pain. I worked hard, obeyed, and kept my tears secret. My heart was no longer the soft one I was born with. It was clay, dry, cracked, fragile, but still beating. When I turned 16, something changed inside me. I began to see that life could be more than this. Sometimes, when I went to buy things for Auntie, I would pass by a small library near the church. I started sneaking in after work. The librarian, an old man, allowed me to sit quietly in the corner. I could not read very well at first, but I watched other children and slowly learned. Words became my escape. Through them, I traveled to places I had never seen. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the shop, a customer came in. She was tall, fair, and spoke kindly. Her name was Madame Neka. She asked me how old I was. I told her 16. She looked surprised and asked why I wasn't in school. I said, "My aunt says there's no money." Something in her eyes softened. She told me to visit her office the next day. I didn't know if she was serious, but my heart refused to let go of the hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, maybe this is my chance. The next morning, before Auntie Rose woke up, I ran to the address Madame Neka had written on a piece of paper. It was a small office painted blue, with the sign, "Children First Foundation." When she saw me, she smiled. She listened to my story without interrupting. Then she said, "You will go to school." I stared at her, thinking I had heard wrongly. She said again, "We will pay your fees." I cried. It was the first time in years that someone showed me kindness without wanting something back. Within a week, I was enrolled in a nearby community school. They gave me a new uniform, books, and a small bag. The first day I wore that uniform, I stood in front of the mirror and smiled. I felt like a bird that had been trapped for years and had just found its wings. School was hard. I was older than most of my classmates, and some laughed at me, but I didn't care. I studied every night by candlelight, even after long hours at Auntie's shop. I wanted to make Mama proud, wherever she was. Years passed, and I began to rise. I became one of the best students. Teachers started calling me the quiet star. I still lived with Auntie, but her insults no longer sank deep into me. I had built a wall around my heart, made of clay, yes, but strong enough to stand. When I turned 18, I wrote my final exams and passed well. Madame Neka told me about a small scholarship from her foundation to a polytechnic in Enugu. I was afraid to tell Auntie Rose, but she found out and said, "So you want to leave my house?" I said yes. She glared at me and said, "Then go. Don't come back here crying." I packed my few clothes and left. I didn't look back. That was the day my real life began, the day the cracked clay heart inside me began to dry in the sun, slowly becoming something new. When I arrived at the Polytechnic in Enugu, the world felt new and strange. For the first time in my life, I was free. Free to wake up when I wanted, free to walk without being shouted at, free to dream. I didn't have much. My bag held only 3 dresses, 2 notebooks, and a heart full of fear and hope. I chose to study social work because I wanted to understand pain, not just mine, but the kind that lived inside other people too. I wanted to help those who had no one to speak for them. Every time I sat in class and listened to the lecturers talk about helping the broken and forgotten, I saw my mother's face, my own life, and all the children like me who were lost. But freedom was not easy. I had to work part-time to pay for extra things the scholarship didn't cover. I cleaned classrooms, carried buckets of water for the hostel, and washed clothes for some girls who laughed at me. They didn't know that every coin I earned was a stone I used to rebuild my life. I didn't mind the work. What I feared most was loneliness. I missed Mama's voice, her laughter, even her scolding. Some nights when the wind blew hard through the windows, I felt like a small child again, afraid of the dark. But I would close my eyes and whisper to myself, "Don't give up." Then came Ebuka. He was in my class, quiet, gentle, always reading. He started talking to me after a seminar. At first, I didn't want to get close to anyone. My life had taught me that love was dangerous, that people always left. But Ebuka was different. He listened when I spoke. He never judged. Slowly, I began to trust him. He told me I was strong, that my eyes carried both sorrow and courage. He said he admired how I smiled even when life had been unfair. I had never heard anyone say kind things to me before. My heart, that fragile clay heart, began to soften again. We became close. We shared food, stories, and dreams. For the first time, I felt what love could be, not pain, but warmth. I thought God had finally rewarded me for all I had suffered. But love, I learned, can also be a test. During my second year, I discovered I was pregnant. I remember the day I found out. My hands shook so badly that I dropped the test strip on the floor. My mind went blank. I was scared. Not because of the baby, but because of what the world would say. When I told Ebuka, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I'm not ready for this." Those words broke me more than any beating or hunger ever did. He stopped taking my calls after that. I waited, begged, and cried, but he was gone. I was alone again, carrying a child, with no family, no money, and no one to hold my hand. For days, I didn't eat. I walked around the campus like a shadow. People whispered. Some girls pointed at me and laughed. I thought about giving up. I thought about disappearing. But one night, as I sat in the dark, I heard Mama's voice in my heart. "Promise me you will not give up." That memory saved me. I wiped my tears and decided that if no one wanted my baby, I would want her enough for both of us. I worked twice as hard. I took small cleaning jobs in the evenings, washing plates at restaurants, mopping classrooms, selling sachet water. I carried my baby inside me with pride. When my body became too heavy, I studied from my bed. I promised my unborn child that I would finish school no matter what. When she was born, I named her Amaka, which means beautiful one. The moment I held her tiny body, I felt something powerful inside me. All the pain, all the scars, all the years of suffering, they suddenly had meaning. This little girl was my reason to live. Raising her was not easy. There were nights when I had no food, days when I had to leave her with neighbors just to work. Sometimes I cried quietly while watching her sleep, wondering if I was enough. But every time she smiled, my strength returned. My classmates graduated before me, but I didn't mind. I took extra time, carrying my baby to class on my back. Some lecturers tried to discourage me, but I kept going. I finished my studies and graduated with good grades. When I collected my certificate, I looked up to the sky and whispered, "Mama, I did it." After school, I went back to Madame Necka's foundation. She still remembered me. When she saw me, she hugged me and said, "I knew you would make it." She gave me a small job as an assistant social worker. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to rent a tiny room and feed Amaka. That was how my healing began. Not all at once, but slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. Working at the foundation opened my eyes to more stories like mine. I met children who had been abandoned, girls who had been hurt, and boys who had no parents. Every time I listened to them, I felt my own pain rise, but instead of drowning me, it gave me strength. I told them, "You can survive." You can rise, I became known as Auntie Mgbafo, the woman who smiled even when life had been unkind. People came to me for advice. Some called me a mother, others called me a sister. But I knew the truth. I was just a woman who refused to die in silence. Years passed. Amaka grew into a bright, joyful girl. She asked me one day, "Mummy, why don't I have a daddy?" I looked at her and smiled softly. I told her that sometimes God gives us one parent so we can learn extra strength. She hugged me and said, "You are enough." That night, I cried, not from pain, but from gratitude. By the time I was 30, I had helped over 100 children find homes through the foundation. The organization began to grow and they made me a coordinator. I began traveling to villages and towns, talking about education, kindness, and survival. My voice, which had once been full of silence, was now full of purpose. One day, after a long seminar, I walked home and passed by a small market. I saw a woman selling clay pots. They were beautiful, round, simple, with tiny cracks that made them look alive. I stopped and picked up one shaped like a heart. The woman said, "Ah, that one is special. It breaks easily, but if you keep it safe, it will last forever." I bought it. That night, I sat